All right, let's call this meeting to order.
Ready?
Yep, you're on. I
Okay.
did like that.
Nice work. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Practicing.
Oh, my God. So today, a couple of things to go over primarily. Well, we can circle back around on this short-term rental ordinance, although there's really not much to report there. And then I wanted to spend some time on the subdivision ordinance since we've been talking about that for a little while. And any other items that we need to deal with?
We
So
have a running list somewhere, don't we? Do you have a running, I was gonna say, yeah.
Make a running list, yes. The short-term rental ordinance, haven't really done much to that, even since our last meeting, so I've been working on some other things, but we do need to dive back into that. What part of that does trigger for me is there's a few things on the that kind of come out of that, thinking about what other things should we be looking at in the ordinance, like we talked about last time for to facilitate good thought around housing development and whatnot. And one thing that we didn't talk about last time was the idea of what am I gonna call it? It's really, it's like seasonal employment housing.
Dormitories, and
Oh,
bunkhouses, it's in the
Yeah,
minutes.
okay, good. I didn't think we,
did.
but Bar Harbor actually has a pretty interesting standard for that, which I'll try to print off for the next meeting and bring it in, but it's kind of an interesting approach and the way they think about it. And you can do, I think there's a couple of different kinds that you can do, and it depends on where in town you can do them. So it's just one more thing to throw on the list.
That's probably on the Bar Harbor website anyways. Isn't it?
It's on their website, but you have to dig for it a little bit, so happy to try to get it for everybody. Right. So yeah, not much to report for SDRs, but where we wanted to spend the majority of the time today was we've been working on the idea that the current subdivision ordinance is out of date for the most part and needs to be updated. And we have prepared a model subdivision ordinance, which I think some of you may have already seen, but this is based on the state law and a model ordinance that we have tailored to non-desert and integrated some things from the current ordinance as well. So the main things that I wanted to go over today were like just to refresh everybody's memory, sort of the structure of this particular ordinance. And then start to think about the things that are unique to different to non-desert subdivision ordinance that are not necessarily in the model. So, we'll go from there. But so the structure is pretty much the same as a lot of other ordinance with the applicability section. There's a few things that are highlighted in yellow, which are things that we'll read through this to try to figure out, if we have to tweak it to be more consistent with non-desert. I don't know if we need real feedback on this one at this point. And then I personally, I kept the definitions in the front of the ordinance. If we want to be consistent with the way that we typically do things in Mount Desert, we would put the definitions in the back. So I actually like the definitions in the back when I read ordinances, so I may just do it. But if anybody has any preferences, let me know.
I'm good with that.
We still need to go through the definitions and make sure that there aren't things in there that are duplicative of the land use ordinance or other things. And then in this ordinance, we still kept the same format for administrative procedures. So I'm on page 10, where we have, this is where we set out the what you do in terms of setting an agenda, meetings with other municipalities. This is pretty standard stuff. Application fee, all that good stuff. Kim, we can go through this and just like iron out timelines and whatnot that match different notification requirements. That's why those are highlighted. We still have a sketch plan review process.
How different is this than the one we have now?
In this form, the steps are pretty much the same.
Yeah.
But some of the things that you are asking for are going to be a little different. It's, what I've tried to do is go through the existing ordinance and say, take things that are like, okay, this is pretty good for Mount Desert. And like, make it, if it's simpler, we can do that. If not, and if it's not consistent with the state, then we have to like make it that way. That's what this model is good for. So then we have the final plan review, and there's a public hearing process, notifications and stuff. We'll go through it. That's pretty standard stuff. And then in this version, which I think is really helpful, is like a checklist almost of required submissions for different things in the process, and we can go through the, you know, the sketch plan review and see if anything is overly burdensome. The idea is you want to provide the planning board with enough information that they can give you good feedback on a development a subdivision application, but without making a significant investment in any design or you know, requiring any direct you know, feedback, because really nothing in the sketch plan is like set in stone. So that's sort of the idea, but to give an applicant a little more information and just, you know, let's basically right now you can probably come into the mapping. Then the final plan submission, you know, I just need to compare and go through here one more time and make sure that this is consistent. But again, this is like, here are the things that are required for you to submit a complete subdivision application. One thing I noticed that I haven't done yet, I don't think, is currently the way the process works is we go through subdivision application for these standards, and then the planning board looks at other standards in the land use ordinance. So it's like a double review, which we probably have to do here.
Do you plan to create a subdivision application?
Yes,
If we don't have one.
yep, that's part of what this is for too.
This,
Yeah, but yes,
Yeah, because it says completed application and application fee.
yep, and the application is usually just like a one pager, but these are all the things that go along with it. But yeah. Okay. Sort of processy stuff, nothing, I mean, you guys are just looking at it, so I don't expect a lot of comments. And then the way that the section 7 is, these are the review criteria and standards. So what I found is interesting about this one was because when you're on the planning board, you actually have to go and look at it. What criteria and standards are you trying to meet? And this breaks it out in those terms. Some of this I need to review again because I've already gone through this a bunch of times, but I still keep finding things that are more like, hey, do we actually have to deal with this thing in the town of Desert? So I'm continuing to go through that. But if you're reading through it and you're like, what is this? Like just today, as I was reading one more time, I edited out some stuff to do with the model actually required monument markers and subdivisions when you could just approve like a pin. So this leaves it up to the surveyor or the developer. But that's at the end. Let's see. Yeah, so the standards are basically water supply, impact on groundwater, soil and erosion control, traffic conditions and roads. This on page 22 starts to integrate the town's road standards here. I need to go back through at one point. I actually had to look at our road standards and give me some comments. So I just need to make sure that some of that stuff is in this document. Because here the road standards are actually in the subdivision ordinance and not in the land use ordinance or in the separate road ordinance.
yeah, this is different.
Mm-hmm.
Is this under the road acceptance policy?
I haven't gotten
No,
there.
well, I'm just wondering, because you've got 18 and now it's 16 and 3 foot
Yeah,
shoulders.
I need to-
I didn't know if Tony
No,
was using when you asked him if he was using the road exception.
he probably was. Yep,
Okay.
yep, because I actually was looking at it
Because it's
today.
different.
Yeah,
And someday we'll try to get the existing subdivision roads to conform.
someday.
I'm
Well-
thinking about the one that I live on.
So right
And
now,
it's-
I think,
There's nothing
The
good
one
about
you
it.
live on is nice.
Oh, it is?
It
Oh.
is.
Oh,
Side of
thank you.
Ridge. Yes, it is.
We don't have a turnaround
No.
at the end.
Well,
but we-
because
we
it
have-
showed plan at one point, it went like to Beach Hill Road and back.
It was going to cut across to Beach Hill
Yeah.
itself, but we're all talking about that. So it's, the people on one side of the road that aren't related to each other are talking about it. And the
To the people that are related.
people that are related on the other side of the road, they're not part of the discussion.
yeah. So in Mount Desert, I've always found that really
I was just
interesting,
gonna
since subdivisions do develop over time, so you could have a subdivision and then several years later have another one, that kind of thing. So we've had situations here in town where you have the first leg, which is developed with the set of road standards, which are not the same as the next leg. And that's why there's already two provisions. We have a couple of different ways to deal with that in this subdivision ordinance. That's one thing I haven't added back in yet, is the road modification process that we came up with a couple years ago, where you can go to the planning board and ask for some modifications of standards because you're developing at the end of a previously approved subdivision, and the road met the standards at the time, but your new thing wouldn't, and you'd have to go and like make the whole thing.
I think of what.
Yeah, which isn't, I don't think the way that you necessarily want to do that. So that's why that provision's already in place. That is really exciting stuff. Sewage disposal, solid waste, again, these are all things that you have to deal with for the check boxes on the subdivision law. Aesthetic and cultural and natural values. So, the applicant goes and gets letters from the Maine Historic Preservation and Department of Marine Resources and whatnot. Farmland is a thing, but we may be able to take that out, but it is in the rules. There's no dedicated farmland in Mount Desert,
No,
right?
I don't know if Beach Hill
Yeah,
is.
I think it is. Conformance with local ordinances and plans, that's the other thing where we're talking about. This is where I would typically add the land use ordinance and stuff. Financial and technical capacity, so in some cases, you want to make sure that the applicant has the financial, so this would be like where the applicant would come in with like a spreadsheet or like a modified pro forma to say this is what it's going to cost and this is how we're going to pay for it, or get a letter from the bank or whatever. Technical capacity, hire the appropriate professionals, and here's their CVs. Plain management, if there is anything to deal with. Wetlands, so again, go out and do your natural resources mapping. Stormwater management, Kim will probably want to look through this to make sure it meets the intent. Spaghetti lots, surface waters. Impact on adjoining municipalities. All that good stuff.
And that's just a matter of notifying, right, the town over. That the stuff.
And so if I did a project in Otter Creek. That
And some
actually
was
goes,
about harbor.
yeah, if my property was in. I've never been involved in a project like that. What if that's even ever happened?
I know, it's only been that you notified anybody in
Yeah.
town.
All right, and then at the end on page 29. There is something called access to direct sunlight, which is an optional thing, and I put cluster subdivisions and workforce housing subdivisions. So I just would like to spend a little bit of time talking about both of those because of the way that they're in currently in the town of Mount Desert. There is a provision in the subdivision ordinance that allows for cluster and workforce housing subdivisions, and the ordinance is, well, it's not that complicated, but it is complicated if you don't read it all the time. But the intent of a clustered subdivision technically is different than the intent of workforce housing, so I'd like to try to separate them, so it's more clear.
Mhm.
That if you're doing a cluster project, because you could have my example is if you're on Beach Hill Road, where the lot sizes are bigger, but you maybe over there, we're talking about things through the comprehensive plan, and we want to do some more. We want to allow more density at the same time. We want to maintain as much open space as possible in terms of the connectivity of how open spaces work and that kind of thing. Then you want to have a cluster subdivision. Maybe you don't allow density bonuses, maybe you allow different, just a straight up cluster subdivision, which would allow you to minimize your lot sizes and build less road. So it's cheaper for the developer, more affordable for people who want to buy in. You have smaller lots, but you have a lot more open space. Whereas a workforce project could be a cluster development, but it doesn't need to be. It could be something totally different. Maybe it's an apartment. So I think we want to provide some separation of language between the two to make it clear that you could do one or the other or both. So that's where I'm headed with that.
Good idea.
Any thoughts? So I think you could do workforce housing projects more than you would want to do a cluster development. You could actually have a traditional subdivision and do a workforce subdivision.
Is Farnham's Way considered a cluster? I can't remember.
That's a good question. I don't know what process.
I know they sort of sold it as that, but I don't know
I
if
think
it's
it
actually
is.
called that.
It might
I think
be
it is.
smaller
Those
lots.
here on that.
Yep. And what is the
And
one,
workforce.
what is the one in Seal Harbor?
Day Mountain.
Day Mountain is a traditional subdivision that is workforce.
Yeah,
Mhm.
So I think just the tools that you're looking at are important,
Mhm.
So there's that language. So your 30-something page document could be a little longer. Yeah.
It's about like-
Nah. It's not a complicated process at all. Yeah, at the end, we have some waivers. Should be some waiver provisions. Revisions to approved plans, so technically. You have to come back once you're in the subdivision, you should really come back and get a modification. There's performance guarantees,
It's,
options.
with that, is there? Have you thought of putting in language that an amendment only is required if it's within 5 years from the date of,
We could do that,
like, time it, instead of going back to 1978?
right? It depends on, that's a policy choice, I think. You're allowed to do that as a policy choice as a town.
Well, I just think it's
Yeah.
ridiculous to make somebody go back when their subdivision's been in since like 1970 or 80.
Sure.
Mhm.
I think the 5 year, it's all about subdivisions is 5 years, and I think that's what our ordinance would say.
Yeah, I think the challenge is, I don't know how that works. I'll have to talk to Andy about that. I think the challenge is once you've recorded the subdivision plan,
Mhm.
you have to get it. You have to modify that through the registry, and that might require planning board.
Yeah, but does it require a whole re-review, but also, I mean, can it be like a minor
Yeah,
subdivision review? Where obviously, like, if it's on, it's out of town and it's not on sewer, that they just show test pits for the lot that's being carved out and driveway and road or something, lot area to show that wetlands aren't, not such a long and drawn out and thorough review. It can be minor versus major.
yep. I'll look into that. Speaking of minor versus major, we did make a choice a while back to not have a minor subdivision versus major subdivision, but that's still a possibility. It would not be that hard to add.
Well, I mean, maybe it should be cut up to like the number of lots or the
Yep.
number of dwellings.
Yeah. And a
Like
lot of,
cap a minimum, like 3 or something is minor.
What happens if they want to develop beyond that and then it becomes a major development subdivision?
Well, depending on like years, I
Yeah.
guess, time frame.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just sometimes some of the stuff is so minor.
Mhm.
It has to go like 3 to 4 months for a review.
I
Because of the
remember that.
process.
What's that?
I remember that.
2 alternate.
Hmm?
I still have 2 alternates.
Just-
What? Oh, you.
Hasn't your family already done the deed on the planning board, right?
Done. My family is too.
Hmm.
Only we had some young families in town.
Well, we can.
How do we
create-
fix that?
Yes.
We've
I
already
don't
offered
know,
money
Joe.
now, what next?
Anyway,
You know,
Well. Yeah, I mean, what do you guys think about the option of minor versus major subdivision? We can like figure out the rules, I mean, the cutoff, but. To me. Yeah, I like the idea a lot of times, because I think you could go in and have a much more expedited review with a smaller project.
Mhm.
But
and I'm not saying it all falls on me, you know what I mean, how the harbor does it with their planning.
that'd be nice
Cause
too.
you know, planning or planner, we don't have one here, so I'm not asking to put more work on me by any means, but I'm just saying a more easier process.
What
that's
would
right.
you- what would you cut out for a minor subdivision that would be in a major?
I think it's submission requirements. You know, you don't need to go to the level of detail for, like, if you were doing a 10 lot subdivision out. Off town water and without town water and sewer, you might want to require like a geological assessment,
For a big lot.
yeah. For more lots,
Hmm.
whereas a minor one, you might not really care. As much. But I think the way that we've written it, like with waivers and other things, it's almost the same. You just want to iron it out ahead of time. So,
it'd be pretty easy to have a minor subdivision, less than 10 lots, single digits.
yep,
Mhm.
but I think that's most of the projects that you get around here. So that's another reason why I think we decided not to do.
Like the last place I lived and why I moved here, they just approved a 7,000 home
Right,
subdivision.
that's a,
That would be a major.
That's
And,
really.
and I left.
yeah,
Yeah.
I made a for sale sign and
Yeah.
stuck it.
Yeah, wow.
That's
different,
just-
different environment.
It's like those old pictures of California in the 60s when they.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I can
This,
picture
this
it right
was
now.
Jupiter, Florida.
Yeah,
Yeah,
just
it's like
a
Down in
nice,
Florida, yep,
a nice looping road. with-
wow, house after house.
You can't tell apart. That's when those people out here sleeping in the wrong house all the time.
Yeah.
Oh, that's why.
Mhm.
That may have something to do with
Yeah.
whether they drank before that, finding their way home to start.
But
Ah,
maybe we just stick with the regular subdivision. review, and If it becomes an issue, we can always add it, but.
I don't think we're gonna have big ones, at least I hope not.
Yeah, what's the likelihood of
Yeah.
ever having like a 20 lot subdivision or 30 lot?
I think,
There's some
Yeah.
lots out on Indian Point,
I
pretty
think
minor,
that's out of the
Yeah.
realm of
that are good
possibility.
size.
I was just gonna say, where's some swaths of land?
And then if you dedicate workforce housing, your bonus densities, you can.
Mhm.
Also,
Yeah.
let's start maybe in certain areas of the
Okay.
community, start you're thinking about different housing types and developments that would work,
Mhm.
you know? And we don't have a site plan review ordinance, so right now, if you do like an apartment building with 20 units, you'd have to come, or apartment buildings,
Mhm.
you'd have to do subdivision review.
Yeah.
I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility. Do I think 7,000? That's completely outside of the realm. That's like probably, that's more housing than we're gonna see in my lifetime. Built.
And we don't even live in them.
Yeah,
So maybe we should have a major and a minor, just have it there. Then get it in place.
maybe. I'll go back through there. I have a draft that actually has that in it. And I'll go back through and see if it really matters. I kind of think I'll put my applicant hat on and it's almost just as easy to. If you're gonna have to go to the planning board anyway, then it's almost just as easy to ask for a bunch of waivers. You know, hey, we're doing 3 lots. Do we really need to do this, and this? And we'll just waives it.
Mhm.
So I kind of like that. If you have to go to planning board, the benefit of a minor is there's administratively, it just Saves time going to the board.
What if some of you have a non-malleable planning board that doesn't grant waivers?
Yeah, good question. Have to deal with that when the time comes. Yeah, I can bring back another draft with it. I'll look at it. Yeah. Okay, the other thing I would start to think about is, like when, and this may not be for the subdivision ordinance, but, you know, when we start to think about some of these provisions, like clustering the workforce, you know, where are there areas that are more appropriate in town? Like if you did a development on the Beach Hill Road, would you to require a cluster subdivision that is, you know, something or not? I don't know. Those are things to just do on land from a land use side. Probably not for the subdivision rules, but anyway, I would definitely encourage everybody to look through this. It's super interesting. And if there are things that I found really helpful, I know Dave Ashmore read this a while back and came up with some really good comments that we tried to integrate into here just to be like, hey, it's just another set of eyes, you know, do we really need to do this or can we do this slightly differently? And that's what picked up on the monuments, yeah, which I was like, oh, of course.
Monuments?
Yeah, instead of monument.
Oh, it's the, yeah.
Yep.
That just said monuments.
Yes,
Surveyors don't use monuments today.
yeah, so
Well, they
I
still
found
mention
that-
monuments in it.
No, but I'm just saying that they did,
They
with
don't lay 'em
monuments,
out.
there was no option, right? I oppose.
You don't want a statue.
Well, they are monuments, they're just not
Well, I see.
granite.
If they can grant
Yeah.
it, so typically a
Those
monument.
little granite squares, yeah.
Yeah, you could do that, but nobody does.
We've got some in the backyard.
What's that?
We've got some in our backyard.
Yeah,
still,
that's
but
pretty cool.
so they can't find
Don't
them.
take the excavator out there.
These trickle.
Yeah.
They're there.
So, yeah. At some point, it would be really helpful to kind of take a meeting and once you get a chance to read through this, and I'll probably have a different draft at some point too, but just go through the standards and make sure they make sense. And then we're gonna take this and have to meet with the planning board because they're the ones that actually do it. Subdivision,
Mhm.
good stuff. But this is a kind of I think it'll be an important thing to, we're gonna do a repeal and replace. So just take the old one and trash it and adopt a new one.
With the new one.
Okay.
That's the way I would do it.
It's so outdated.
It's too confusing otherwise. Make sense? All right. Well, that's what I was working on. Sorry, it's not a lot more. Anything else we wanted to go over today?
What is next on our,
Well, I do want to get to some of the ordinance changes for the housing stuff that we've talked about, and I think we are still under the directive of polishing up the short-term rental ordinance, so I may,
so that's gonna go back around again next year?
I don't know, I have to
Well,
meet with her about that. I'm just sort of kind of letting things cool a little bit before
That'd
we
be great,
dive
yeah,
in.
I don't, yeah.
My neighbor from Portsmouth still hasn't shown up on the neighborhood. And when he does, I will grill him
Great.
to get what they did for their housing crisis,
Awesome.
which was rentals.
Yep,
And he was in the thick of it. He's an engineer,
cool.
and I'll try to get as much documents as I can.
Oh, that'd be
They
great.
said it really helped
Yeah,
with theirs. And I think they had a target of plus or minus $1,000 for rent.
mhm.
They didn't want to have rent that was so high that they couldn't save money to buy a house in the future.
Interesting. So they said if you're at a certain level, you don't need to register.
I can't remember if they were given town land to help with all the costs and everything like that.
Hmm,
But that was their big parameter, was try to keep it as low as they could
cool.
to do that.
All right. yeah, I started to look up horsemanship and got totally sidetracked, so.
I was just talking to I can't think of his name, at the post office, and I said, oh, do you have help, this year, because a woman has started. And he said, I'm hoping so, but maybe not, because she's having problems with housing. Her rent in Trenton is $1,800 for just a small little, not, it doesn't include utilities or anything, so it's just reaching further and further. It's
Yeah,
like, wow.
I mean, so somebody asked me the question the other day. And it might have been Lincoln, when Lincoln must have reached out to me and said, so what, hey, I know Bar Harbor's got a list of things that they're working on, or what are you guys working on? And I said, well. My experience is Bar Harbor's ordinances are much more complex than here, and there are actually provisions in Mount Desert that allow you to do some really cool stuff. It's just that people aren't necessarily doing it.
Mhm.
Like already, you can build a second dwelling unit on your lot without any restrictions.
Right.
And nobody's, I mean, I don't know how many, I'd be curious, it'd be kind of a curious number to have, like Kim's got,
Have we had any?
since,
I'm planning one.
Mhm.
Don't tell Kim now.
Yeah.
but so there's a couple of things we need to be thinking about there. One is. That's already a thing that's allowed, and should we be looking at that and figuring out why that's not working? And should we be looking at that to make sure that that provision is actually being used for creating opportunities for year-round housing versus other things? And maybe it doesn't matter, but I feel like we need to ask those questions.
Has
So that's
anyone
that.
come to you yet wanting to do that, or I guess it's pretty, you have had a few. Oh, well, that's good.
Well, isn't that why we had to say it's one secondary dwelling, because people wanted to do multiple?
Oh, yeah. Also, we've had a few then, or whatever, okay.
So there's that. I feel like if you really looked at, we should be looking at densities like we talked about, but there are areas in town which do allow quite a bit of density if you just think, read the ordinance. So we should be looking at that, but the things that are missing seem to be, to me, like, how do we help capture and where do we help capture that need for seasonal stuff? And then the majority of it, a big part of the problem is just the cost.
Yeah. And
So
it's only going up.
Katrina sends me the listings once a month and I'm usually like, oh crap.
Wow,
This isn't-
And I only send you Mount Desert.
yeah.
Right, yeah, we haven't even gotten to, well, we're gonna be at the library tomorrow doing a little talk, and we're pulling together some statistics from Maine Housing about cost of houses on NDI, and it's,
Well, my parents sold their house, 2 years ago, and now it's being sold again for double what they sold it in just 2 years.
yeah,
So it's like, wow, yeah. And they may get it, they may not, who knows, but it's pretty unbelievable.
right. So what we're doing as a community, hopefully, is just putting tools in the toolbox to allow people to, do that. And then I guess there's that, since I've been back here for 20 years or so, and when I first moved back, it was like a complete opposite mentality than what we're dealing with today. So I'm just sort of like, I think we're gonna shift to be a little more permissive, but we also have to be kind of mindful that it needs to shift back to the middle at some
At
point.
some point, a little bit, yeah.
Anyway, yeah, I remember some heated planning board meetings on the Bar Harbor. Good
I
times.
think they're all heated, aren't they? I mean, it doesn't matter what meeting is going on over
Yeah, that's
there.
probably true.
They're all,
We had somebody come in and like slam down a bottle of like it's a mason jar,
oh, wow.
slammed it on the thing. There was something floating in the water, and he said, "That's what you're gonna do to my water quality." It was like
Wow, they were bringing it
dog
on.
poop in the water.
Oh my God. Yeah, well, I guess, yeah, they have some interesting people over there.
Good times.
Keep it lively.
Yes, but yeah, there's a few things to think about. That's sort of, when Lincoln asked me that question, it kind of got me thinking, well, what do we need to do in the ordinance that would be, more, I feel like we've been for many years, just sort of continuing that effort to make the ordinance more.
Very well.
Yeah.
Well, just because there's big swaths of land on Indian Point Road and pretty much doesn't necessarily mean people are gonna sell those either. That's the other, to sell,
Or develop.
or develop, that's the other, you just
Well,
might
it's
be there,
expensive
but
to
who
develop
knows?
too.
Yeah, I
mean,
don't,
Materials, supplies, and
Right,
just,
yeah.
that's why sometimes people
Just hold it.
build them, but then they charge you an arm and a leg
Well,
for it
yeah.
because they have to make up for what they put in
Right,
there.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, as a municipal board here, group, I mean, your job is to facilitate. If somebody decides to do that,
Right.
where would they do it and how would they do it that's appropriate to whatever the goals are for the community? And that's pretty much, that's what
Yeah.
our role.
If
And
the
then-
subdivision is a workforce housing subdivision, is it taxed at the same rate as a single family home, or do workforce housing subdivisions get a reduced tax rate so that they can stay affordable?
I don't know, it's a great question. I'll have to ask.
Because I mean, that's another thing that people don't always take into consideration when they're purchasing a home is their taxes. If you look at the purchase price, that's one thing, but then you look at your taxes. We're lucky that our taxes are low, but
Yeah, but didn't that, Steve Anastasia came in and said he bought his house for this, but now it's assessed for this.
Yeah, so the
It
assessments
went to
the
like 310,
assessments do go up.
yeah, they do go
Yeah.
up.
Mhm.
When you put
There's
improvements,
taxes
of
go up,
course,
yeah.
and he
Right.
added on.
He
to
added
his
on.
house.
But they probably all went up. But less than.
Well, I don't know, but I'm just
Right.
saying that he did some serious modifications to his, that would obviously, of course, his house assessment would go up.
Well, I'm sure that there's I mean, it would be interesting to ask Kyle, but there must be something in the formula that helps keep the taxes down, but it still allows for it to go up as the value goes up. And then the value is capped at, it's just a percentage of the area median income. So
Mhm.
as that goes up, the value of the house can go up. And then they have caps on, if you invest in, I want to build a garage. Like,
Right.
you can't put more into the house to make it
Right.
unaffordable for the range that you're.
Well, you can, but you can't recap it.
And you
Right.
can't
Yeah,
sell
you
it
could
for it.
decide.
Yeah.
what you
You
want.
can over,
Yeah.
and anybody can over improve. We all make mistakes.
Yeah, but you just won't regain the.
That's right.
Right,
Yeah.
got it. Huh.
Solid gold fixtures.
That's- Yeah,
How would you determine if, lots have sufficient water supply? When you're drilling wells down, I assume,
Yep.
most of us have a well.
yep. So there's an
Yeah.
actual hydrogeological analysis that you do. And you have to go and either drill test wells or tap into another well adjacent to you, and it's called a drawdown test. So it draws down the rate, if you find your well, and you can, there's a bunch of math that's beyond my brain, my Tremont brain to figure out, but that's how it works.
So I have a neighbor on one side of me, but not the other.
Yep.
Mhm.
So,
So in Mount Desert right now, that's not required, but in Bar Harbor, and I think the planning board could ask for
They can, yeah, they
Yeah.
can, they know.
it. So. In many projects I've worked on in Bar Harbor, that's just a thing you have to do.
That's good.
You have to do a hydrogeological
Yeah.
assessment to a drawdown test.
Yeah.
Yep,
so those homes on Farnham's Way, they're all real close to each other. I think they have wells there.
I'm sure they do.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Actually,
I
I'm
don't
not sure
think
they
so.
do.
Are they in sewer?
They extended the sewer,
Yeah.
and they did the water too.
Did they do it up there? I didn't know
I
that.
think they have, they have town sewer, but
I don't think there's water.
There's no water.
There's sewer, but I don't know if the water runs up there, because we don't have water.
Remember.
You have a well, yeah.
Yeah, that
Would
must
you
be
have a
well.
well?
yeah, there's no town water.
Yeah,
No.
no,
Yeah,
no,
no.
too.
I don't think they put water
I
up
know they
there.
extended the sewer
Yeah,
up there.
Well, it's all downhill from there, so.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yep. So water is interesting and septic systems are interesting. Those are for the bigger projects, what's the approach? And
You
a
can't
lot
have
of
it.
this is
You
just,
can't have a shared septic system under the current ordinance.
which is weird.
You have to have it on your own property.
Yeah, it's too bad.
Mhm. Oh,
You
wow.
should allow that.
Hmm.
And then you have to deal with your neighbor.
Yeah,
and houses are. Basically, you use how many bedrooms you have in a house,
It's designed by-
determine
Yep.
septic and water and everything, not bathrooms.
Right.
You could have 100 bathrooms,
Yes.
and that doesn't matter.
And they could have gold fixtures.
Yeah.
If they wanted. yes.
Yeah,
I will say this water conversation is making me think that maybe a small versus large subdivision application does make a lot of sense. If you're only talking maybe a 3-lot subdivision with 3 wells and 3 septic systems, maybe you don't have to go through the whole process of, I know we don't now, you said that, but of having to do a geologic survey and all that.
Yeah,
Something to think about.
I feel like the way it was written was so that you don't automatically have to do it.
I don't think you do.
I didn't read through it, yeah.
What's that, Jim?
Oh,
Well, we just got it,
I'm not, there's no excuses, Kim.
and I sent it to him in email, because I didn't think he'd be in person.
Dedicated civil servant.
That's right.
Yeah, so there's
You're
some.
planning
language there,
later
I just
dinner,
have to
that's all it is.
See what it actually,
Yes,
just to refresh my memory about what it
Yeah.
actually says, when it's required.
Say it again.
If there is something in there, but I don't know if it's always required.
But if you go back to large and small, I think, I'm just trying to think about, is large the parcel of land that's being subdivided, or is large the size of the lots that are being offered? What is large?
The number of,
I'd say the
the
number
number of
Yeah.
units,
of lots created.
yeah,
Okay,
however
Or
you,
the number of units.
yeah, however you do it.
I think a number, set a number.
Yeah, the number of lots or dwellings. I'd say.
Somebody that was building seasonal housing, dormitory stuff. Those wouldn't count as individual units.
Yeah,
Not typically, no.
so the 81 units, the 81 beds that are gonna be
In the dormitory areas.
Yeah.
in Bar Harbor.
Yeah.
Doesn't
Well,
matter how many bathrooms they have.
No.
Two.
No.
yeah, I guess we
Two.
call it a dorm, but I think if you said,
Whatever.
in Bar Harbor,
Hostel.
there's different,
No.
you know.
They have
Layers, so in,
transients
in,
and- Yeah,
Mhm.
in Mount Desert, we might not be super fired up about their most intensive one, like a full-on dorm, but we might say, hey, there's one that I think allows up to, I don't know if it was like 8 or 9 bedrooms or something in with one bath, you know, in one unit. It's a really, it's interesting.
similar like our rooming house.
Yeah,
Up to 16.
yeah, and we need to think about
Oh, that's
where,
right. Someone was asking about the kernels. That's right. We only, yeah, you can go up to 16, which is insane. We don't have, I think we've got 10 for 2 bathrooms. I can't imagine 16 for 2
It's
bathrooms.
like a college dorm.
What, I mean, I can't even imagine, I don't
Yeah, but
even,
it's one kitchen. One common kitchen.
wow.
but I think
that-
here, the other question is, we may have some language that we can already use, but we need to think more broadly about where those things can be used.
Mhm.
So why, I mean, right now, it's just in the downtown, right?
Yeah, it's just a village right here.
Village commercial.
So it won't be
Yeah.
like a hotel on your road.
No, yeah. Bed and
Well,
breakfast.
we allow staff housing on the VC3. I mean, the VR3.
Is that where
After-
Jordan
All right, so
Pond,
there's
Ah,
two,
yeah,
Only west there
two
is
locations.
Yeah.
what's,
That's
how does Jordan Pond qualify?
Jordan Pond.
They like
Jordan Pond
federal or
House.
something.
They're not even in,
They're
there.
not in bar, they're not in
The
Mount
park.
Desert.
They're
Yeah.
feds.
They're
Yeah.
bids.
Yeah.
No.
they're exempt.
I was gonna
Even their
say,
dorm?
But when we did the VR3 for the asked to go to rezoning.
Yeah.
We actually put staff housing limitation allowed on there, but it has to be their staff.
Yeah.
That's the only one that
Yeah.
I know of where there's any type of staff housing.
But on the Indian Point Road, on one of those big lots,
Yeah.
could you put a, you know, nice.
You have to talk the buses into going out there, it's the only problem.
If you are a hotel owner or
You
something.
yeah.
would provide it,
Just for-
Yeah,
and that's kind of their problem anyways. It's not a municipal
Yeah.
problem to provide.
I have to
Buses
say
for
whether
employee.
people like what they're doing by the school, they tore down that restaurant, I think, at least they weren't buying more houses. To put
Right.
staff in, at least they tore
Well,
that down and,
They said they're
Yeah.
gonna release the houses back to the market.
yeah, I
So
thought,
that-
well, you know what, I
That
mean,
would
I know
work.
people are having a
Market
fit.
nights
over
that
there.
So
Yeah,
they made it work.
but I was like,
Oh, they're
at
building
least,
during this time period.
I would say,
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know, I talked with them at the housing
I
summit.
Yeah.
to him
He's-
too.
Yeah.
he's actually is.
Yeah.
Very conscientious about.
yes, yeah.
That over there,
yeah,
I think more people are becoming more conscientious because it's
yes.
right,
obvious that it's
Yeah.
The
hurting.
problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think especially those hotel owner that have been on the island a while. I think some of the newer hotel owners may not be quite as
Well,
on board yet, but they may get there after some more of their projects.
yeah, I mean, I think, so my reflection is, again, at Bar Harbor, there was never the opportunity to do what they're doing, so you were
Right.
forced to do
Yeah.
something today, they're gonna
Yeah.
meet their needs
Mhm.
somehow.
Mhm.
So, I mean, that the park
Yeah.
is just as guilty, they did it, and now
Yep.
they're switching their policies around a little
Yeah.
bit.
Well, didn't the YW buy Hamilton? I mean, there
Yes.
are people, are other things at least in the works too.
Yeah.
I mean, how long they may take to come about, but at least there are some people
Yeah,
thinking about some things more.
good stuff.
Hopefully.
My kids will have to pitch a tent to live here. I'll be like, I'll save you a little.
You can pitch it then.
Yeah, it's probably not.
Without a
You're right.
platform, it'll be
There's
okay.
the ordinance.
That's right. They won't even be doing that. Yeah,
Yeah, I know you can't build a shed, and you
Yeah.
couldn't,
Yeah.
you can,
yeah. That's right. They can live in a shed.
yes. they
Down the
can.
bottom of
Yeah.
As long as there's no sink in there.
That's right. That,
Or cooking
hey, that'll be
facilities.
on them. They can come up to the house.
Yeah, so those are things to think about.
Mhm.
That's all I had.
All right.
Interesting.
Sorry, it's so short.
No.
Sorry.
That's good, thank you.
Mhm.
Do I hear a move to adjourn?
Yeah,
Second.
Everyone?
there we go.
All right.
That's right.
Thank you.
We're good.
Everybody goes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Nice job.
Thank you. Grasping.